Well, so then your first mission,
Oh, well,
describe your first mission.
before we get to that, Jeff,
All right.
you might say that and I think it's explained in my book somewhere, and maybe the epilogue, that the attitude toward war was so different then than it is, say, in Vietnam or today, because everybody wanted to get in the war. All of the people in my generation, and unless they had some physical defect, most of all of my friends were in the service, Navy, Army, Marines, submarines, what have you, Air Force. We were gung ho, you might say. We would the patriotism was at a very high ebb, not ebb, but peak,
Mm-hmm.
and we were somewhat innocents, you might say, in that we wholeheartedly accepted all the propaganda that the United States was able to throw at us.
Mm-hmm.
And we could never imagine that the United States did anything bad. Unlike in Vietnam, we thought that our country was next to perfect. And it was interesting to see what happened to the national conscience in Vietnam. And when we finally learned that our government did not always tell us 100% of the truth.
Mm-hmm. Your first mission was, and
Oh, well,
what happened?
I was joined a squadron of airplanes and pilots that were meant to man an escort carrier. Now, escort carriers were small carriers that had been, for the most part, converted from merchant vessels.
Mm-hmm.
And when the war broke out, we were so short of carriers that we converted quite a number of merchant vessels into what they called escort carriers, and they carried a smaller complement of pilots. There might have been 15 fighter pilots and 10 torpedo pilots and 10 dive bombers. So they weren't probably about half the complement of a big carrier.
Mm-hmm.
But we were reaching for straws in those days.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, we didn't even have an escort carrier to fly off of. We were based on land, as were a number of Navy squadrons at the time, because of the fact that our carriers that we started the war with had suffered a lot of attrition. The Wasp had been sunk, the Hornet had been sunk, the Yorktown had been sunk, the Lexington had been sunk. So the only carriers we had about the time I was there was the Saratoga and the Enterprise. Now, shortly after I was in combat, the new carriers started arriving with a vengeance. We, 20 or 30 of them, you know, not all at once, but within a few months,
Right.
so that our carrier force was built up very fast. But when I was there, as I say, we had little in the way of carriers. Saratoga, Enterprise, and a converted cruiser, the Princeton. As a consequence, we flew from land. We flew up the ladder from Guadalcanal to Espiritu de Santos, which is we call the New Hebrides Islands. We then flew up to New Georgia. Munda was the airport, Munda Naval Air Station, and that had only been wrested from the Japanese a few weeks before, and so we had established a new airstrip there, and we flew from Munda to attack Bougainville, which was probably 125 miles away, I'm guessing, but and the first mission I was on was we were to knock out Japanese anti-aircraft emplacements that guarded the runway of an airport called Kieta, Kieta, and we were to dive our planes and release our bombs on these anti-aircraft emplacements. Now, a typical naval dive bomb attack would start at 12 to 15,000 feet, and at that point you dive seemingly straight down, although actually your degrees of dive is probably more like 70%, but it seems like you're going straight down, and you have a telescopic sight in front of the pilot, which he looked at during the dive to see where the target was. And we had dive flaps which opened on the back end of the wing, and they opened both up and down like that. How would you explain that?
Like a V or a T?
Yeah.
V? Yeah.
And that slowed you from diving too fast, because by being slower, you were able to more accurately bomb.
Right, choose your target.
The only trouble is it perhaps made you an easier target.
Right, yeah.
I would say we were only probably going about 300 knots when we were in our dive. Maybe 350, but no more. And